Hello friends, today we are going to study about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Let us see the basic structure of a flower first. We have the petals. Petals are nothing but the brightly colored parts of the plant. They can be of various shapes, of various colors. They are very pleasant to look at, thus attracting different pollinators like insects, birds, etc. towards the flower. Then we have the sepals. If you have ever noticed a bud, we must have seen the green leaf-like structures enclosing it. So those are nothing but sepals. So when a flower is in the bud stage, the sepals protect the bud, and when the flower blooms, it provides structural support to the flower. Okay. Then we come to the reproductive organs. The male reproductive organ is called as the stamen, and the female reproductive organ is called as the pistil. So based on the presence or absence of the stamen and pistil, we can classify the flower as two types. Okay, it can either be unisexual, like the name says, uni means one. So unisexual flowers will contain either the stamen or the pistil. It cannot contain both within the same flower. It should contain only one of the two. And bisexual, like the name says, it contains both the stamen and pistil within the same flower. Okay, some examples of unisexual flowers include flowers like papaya, watermelon, brinjal, etc. And some examples of bisexual flowers include flowers like hibiscus, petunia, etc. We will study about the reproductive organs in detail. So first we have the stamens, or the male reproductive parts. As we can see here, it consists of a slender stalk-like structure. This white structure here, this is called as the filament. At the end of the filament, we have anther. So this is called as the anther. The anther contains pollen sacs. These pollen sacs produce the pollen grains. The pollen grains are very important because they contain the male gamete or the male sex cell. Okay, so the pollen grains are nothing but yellowish sticky powdery substances that contain the male gamete. If you have ever touched a flower, you must have noticed the yellowish powder sticking to your hands. That is nothing but the pollen grains. Now we will see about the female reproductive structure, which is called as the pistil or the carpel. So here we have the dissection of a flower. So in this dissection, as we can see, this is the female part of the flower. So we have the ovary at the base, which is connected to an elongated tube called as style, and at the tip we have the stigma. Okay, so this bulged portion at the base is called as ovary, and it contains the ovules. Ovules are the eggs which contain the female gametes. So the female sex cells are present inside the ovules within the ovary. So the ovary is connected to this tube-like structure called as style, and at the tip we have stigma. This stigma is usually sticky because the pollen grains have to stick to the stigma in order for pollination to take place. Now we will see what is pollination. Okay, the transfer of pollen from stamen to stigma of a flower is called as pollination. So pollination is nothing but the transfer of pollen grains from the stamen, that is the male part of the flower, to stigma, which is the female part of the flower. This is called as pollination. So pollination can be of two types again. It can be self-pollination, where, like the name says, it happens by itself. Okay, it can happen within the same flower, or it can happen to any flower within the same plant. Or it can be cross-pollination, where the transfer happens between two flowers of the same species, but they are located in two different plants. This is called as cross-pollination. Obviously, for this pollination to occur, there should be some pollinating agents. So agents are nothing but the substances that help in pollination to take place. They can be things like wind, water, or animals. Like, we have insects, we have birds. In this picture here, we can see a honeybee acting as a pollinating agent. When the honeybee comes to suck nectar from the flower, the pollen grains stick to its body, and when it lands on another flower, the pollen grains reach the stigma of that flower, and thus pollination takes place. Okay. Now we will see what happens after pollination. So here, as we can see, the pollen grains has landed from the anther to the stigma of the flower. So this portion is called as the stigma. when the pollen grains land on a suitable stigma, what happens is the germination of a pollen tube takes place. This tube is called as a pollen tube. So the pollen tube begins germinating. Within this pollen tube travels the male gamete. So this is the nuclei of the male gamete. The male gamete travels through the pollen tube. Okay. So this pollen tube grows when the pollen lands on the stigma, it starts developing a pollen tube, and this pollen tube travels through the style, and then as we can see, it will reach the ovary. So inside the ovary, like we have discussed, we have the ovules or the eggs. So they contain the female gamete. So the male gamete fuses with the female gamete to produce something called as a zygote. Okay, to produce something called as a zygote. This zygote will undergo further division to form a embryo. Okay, all this happens inside the ovule, within the ovule. Thus, after this, the ovule will develop a tough covering or a coat, and later on it will transform into a seed. And what happens to the ovary? It will ripen into a fruit. Okay. So what happens to the second nuclei which was traveling to the pollen tube? It fuses with the polar nuclei present in the embryo sac, thus forming something called as an endosperm nucleus. This endosperm nucleus will provide energy to the germinating seed. So this seed later on, when you plant it into the soil, it gives rise to a new sapling. The cycle of reproduction thus continues. The seed will grow into a new sapling. The sapling will grow into a big tree. The tree will give fruits. Once again, we get seeds. The reproduction continues. I hope you guys are clear with this. If you have any doubts, please do let me know in the comment section, and see you in my next video. If you found this video helpful, please do like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.